Hello, everyone. Today I am going to talk about data-driven token design and optimization. My name is Achim, and I'm married. I have two children. I'm coming from North Germany, and I have a traditional engineering background in mechanical engineering, civil engineering, working on innovative support structures for wind turbines. And I have just a passion for sustainability in every sense. And sustainability is also a very important topic for token ecosystems. And I am very fascinated by the aspect of what we can do with cryptocurrencies, like it's programmable money. And the opportunities are infinite. So that's why I'm quite excited about the space and happy to also share some thoughts, some contributions I made so far to the space. And I also want to point out that I'm really impressed by all the speakers here that were here before me, so really in-depth and really fascinating, all the different angles on how we can approach token ecosystems. So my angle will be a little bit more from the early stage startup Web3 business perspective. So I think a lot about how we can use essentially token engineering to help early startups, to make them also sustainable and also to educate them on token ecosystems and their own ecosystems especially. So and I would like to start by showing you like some token design tools we are using and I developed. So the first token design tool is not a tool because it's essentially about people. We have a very great team of different experts representing like different aspects that are important for early Web3 startups. So we have the token designers, I would say the best in the world. And we have me as the token engineer. We have Dimi, he already spoke here today, very smart mind, DAO strategy. We have NFT people, product engineer, marketing. We have the legal side represented, people taking care about fundraising aspects. And so it's just like a very great team. And we have like all these specialists and teams working with us have essentially like access to all of these people. So that is, in my opinion, one of the most important resource and tool that we have like individual partners for all questions related to Web3 startups. Oh, why does no one tell me anything about this? Let me share again. No one is telling me anything. So now you can see all these beautiful faces of our team. Okay, great. Let's move on. So we have like this a little bit differently interpretation of the 3Ds, like the discovery phase, the design phase, and the deployment phase, that how we apply it like in our context, working with young startups. So we have like different programs focusing on these different stages. So like the Basecamp program is more focusing on the more qualitative side, so looking at ecosystems from a higher level perspective, getting like the problem statement down, defining the different stakeholders, like value flows between them, and like just we are thinking about and talking about and drafting if the whole ecosystem makes sense, if the token makes sense, and really draft it out from a higher level perspective. And that is all happening like in this Basecamp program. And then we have like the more in-depth program, I would say, where it is about actually launching the token, the Ascent program, where we also start parameterizing the ecosystem. And this is essentially where we also apply more quantitative tools, such as, you can always start with analytical calculations, you can use spreadsheets, you can use machinations, you can use like more sophisticated environments like CAD, Token Spice, and so on. And you can get like optimized, validated models out of this, can do risk analysis, and then forecast essentially how your ecosystem is going in terms of token supply, but also in terms of valuation. And then we have like the deployment phase in terms of how this like theoretically analyzed and drafted ecosystem then will actually be deployed on chain. Like there is, we use like several different tools, like the different programming languages, like Solidity, Rust, the environments for deploying those ecosystems, like Hardhat, Truffle, Brownie, and so on. And the output is essentially then the live token or the product. And so from what I see, there is really like the spectrum of tools that you need to have in all the different phases. And there are also different emphasis necessary for different types or sectors. So a lot of talks today were more around the DeFi sector, but there are also many application projects, infrastructure, and so on, gaming sector, and it also depends like in which sector or about which sector we are talking when we are considering the level of detail. And there is like the one side who says, okay, we don't need any simulations, we are just looking on our ecosystem from a qualitative perspective, we just use like the market standards, and that is good enough for us. And then there's the other side who says, okay, we need a one-to-one representation, a digital twin of the whole ecosystem, and we want to be very accurate, and maybe there is a lot of money at stake. And in the end, it is like the resource intensity increases the more you come to the right side. And the coding knowledge increases also. So you need to have like more coding knowledge when you want to build more detailed models and ecosystems in general. And this has like one main downside, the user friendliness, because you really need to be an engineer who is capable of programming to essentially work on the right side. And it's difficult to work with sophisticated models when you're not like too much into math, for example. Yeah. So what are the tools on the left or on the right side? So like on the left side, I said already like spreadsheet models, like we have qualitative tools like problem statement and stakeholder mapping, and so in value flow. We can even leverage AI-powered reasoning, so leveraging LLMs to draft like a first token design, for example. And then we have in the middle, I would say, for example, our QTM, the quantitative token model, is also a spreadsheet model, but it's like a macro perspective on the whole ecosystem. It can cover like a variety of different sectors, I would say. So it's not just specialized on DeFi, which obviously comes with a trade-off that it's not really accurate, but it can really help young startups to get a first insight, to get a first idea, first forecast, and iteration for their parameters. So, and this is really, really helpful. And I decided to do it in a spreadsheet because this is accessible, right? Everyone can use a spreadsheet, and everyone can, in this way, learn about their own token ecosystems. Currently, I'm working together with other students. We are working like on a CAD integration so that we can also extend it to more sophisticated analysis where we can then do parameter sweeps, optimizations, Monte Carlo simulations and or runs, and Markov chain, probabilistic agent behaviors, and so on. So this is what we are currently working on for teams that want to build more sophisticated models. Yes. So this is like a little overview of how this QTM, quantitative token model, looks like. It has a 10-year fixed simulation time. One time step is 1 month, so it's really, really rough. It's really like a macro simulation model, and we are coming at the beginning of each time step. There is essentially the emission of tokens into the ecosystem. So we have like the incentivization module, token vesting, airdrops, and so on, and then those tokens will be fed into several meta buckets, and from these meta buckets, they will be then redistributed in finer, more granular, generalized utilities, and then from these utilities, the reward payouts will be defined, and so on. And then there's also like the off-chain business aspect, so which takes account for the general runway of the business, so from which we can also perform burnings or buybacks, and which also measures the user adoption, or where we can define the user adoption. So the quality of output, the quality of results of this model really, really comes down to the quality of input, and you need to do like own market research, own research in general to get these inputs and really understand what is going on if you want to generate like more realistic outcomes. But as I said, we consider this and treat this more like an educational tool for early startups to get a first idea of their ecosystem. So you should not derive any financial advices out of it or rely only on the results in it. And yeah, then we have like the data analytics perspective. What kind of data can we extract in general? So obviously there's the macro market perspective. We can just look at what is happening in the overall market, TradFi perspective, then also crypto market. Then we can look at metrics from fundraising rounds, like how much did they raise, at which valuation, and how much supply did they sell in these individual rounds. Then you can look at vesting schedules, so everything what others are doing, which gives you, again, like another data point, another perspective that you can use, or we can use to put it into like this QTM, for example, or another, or in your own model, to have like a starting point, just to see, okay, what is the market are doing. And then there is one main and major difference to like TradFi, that is like the on-chain reality, because on-chain we have a lot more information than in TradFi. On-chain data is accessible for everyone, and we can literally see every single transaction that is going on in the ecosystem. So we can literally see, we can measure also obvious KPIs like onboarding of users or TVL or volume and all this, but I think what is maybe even more interesting is to see how different incentives work out, like we saw in the previous speech from Gauntlet, very impressive how they analyzed it for Uniswap. And we can, in general, just see how agents behave. And this is really crucial and fundamentally different to TradFi and when we are just looking at shares in the stock market, for example. And we have socials. We all know that like Twitter, Reddit, Discord, Telegram, and so on, all these social media platforms also play a crucial role for token economies and how they perform. And all that data is available to us, and I think it's very valuable data that we should use, we should leverage to first get a first idea for our own parameters of our own ecosystem, but also to validate our models. Here's like one little example of what kind of data we can look at, like vesting durations. I know it's very tiny here but in general, so we can look at the vesting durations for different stakeholder groups. in this particular diagram, you can see like the vesting duration, the minimum, the mean, and the median, and the maximum for vesting durations across all different sectors. But we also do the same analysis, then differentiate it with respect to the sectors. And from this, you can already see like there is a wide spread and of values. And later on, I will also talk a little bit about why these values are not necessarily the best. But it is the starting point. I just have to look on the time. And then we have, like, for example, token bucket balance histories. Here is an example from Maple Finance. So I looked at the native token of Maple Finance and then looked at all transactions in the whole ecosystem and categorized them into certain like meta buckets. So for example, all Maple related addresses, centralized exchange related addresses, decentralized, and so on, VC addresses. And then we can see essentially, we can create representative balances for each of these stakeholders, and then we can essentially see what is going on in the ecosystem. So here in this example, the balances of all Maple addresses are going down continuously, and then here in the middle, July 22, they introduced their staking contract, and suddenly a lot of supply got allocated to the staking contract. And we also saw like the VCs participated in this staking program. And this is what we can directly see out of this diagram as an example. We can also see how like the balances of exchanges change over time. And it's pretty useful to get like a first overview of what is going on. And then I also looked at individual stake or individual address behavior. So I know it's very small. In general, I looked like what happens with token that got sent by a specific address. So for example, from the staking contract, tokens got sent to certain addresses. Who were the receivers? How much did they got from this address? And then as the next question, what did they do with these tokens? Did they reinvest, for example? Did they send it back? Or did they just sell or deployed it somewhere else? And this is what I looked at in this little analysis here. And it really helps to understand like the behavior from the individual stakeholders. And we can use this data essentially and feed it back into our models. Here in this diagram, I also analyzed the token receiver behavior, but this time not for individual addresses, but again for representative aggregated stakeholder groups. So here, for example, not just for Maple, but also Goldfinch, TrueFi. And you can essentially see like this big blue bar here represents that around 38% of all the tokens that have been received by the staking contract then have been sent back to the staking contract as their first transaction after receiving it. And same for the centralized exchanges, it was like 8%. For decentralized exchanges, was like 14%. And yeah, you really can see when we are going back to the QTM, where we have like these meta bucket allocations, where we can essentially see what is the free supply, floating supply are doing. We can then essentially apply these values to our parameters just to get a first idea of what the behavior in the ecosystem would look like. Yeah, as I said, we can use the values here. This is just an example what would be the output of the QTM, the quantitative token model. So we have the balances of or the supply development in different buckets of a ecosystem. So for example, from the foundation, the team, from the staking allocation, the overall circulating supply, and how many tokens are in the liquidity pool, and so on. And you can essentially forecast this for the whole, for like 10 years in this case. And we also have, yes, we have also a price simulation or forecast. Again, this is not meant to be used for any speculation or any like financial advice, but it helps to understand what is the relationship between supply emissions and also demand for the token, so that we get like a feeling of these two forces, how they are balanced out in the ecosystem over time. As I said, it's more like on the macro perspective and not meant for speculation. And we can, again, also analyze other things like the allocations to the different utilities, if you have different ones, so like how many tokens are staked, how many are used for liquidity, mining incentive program, or how many are burned, if you have a burning mechanism, or if you have like a store or something else where tokens will send to. And on the bottom right, we see the monthly utility rewards, where we essentially see how much of these incentives are valued in dollar denomination, because like the speaker before already, Gabe, like he already mentioned, it is really important to understand also that tokens always have a value, and if we incentivize our ecosystem, it comes at a cost. And so another topic I was working on is a new way of thinking about like vesting schedules, because often I see this question, what are good vesting schedules? And sometimes people come up and say, okay, we just need very long vesting schedules. But this is not always like good, because this means we have a very low supply at the beginning in circulation, and essentially means or opens up the room for a lot of speculation and potential like pump and dump behavior for the market. So this is important to keep in mind. And that's why I came up with this idea to introduce like an adoption adjusted vesting, which is also demand agnostic. So in other words, we don't even need to forecast any demand for the ecosystem, because the emission from vesting will be controlled by a controller, which again will be controlled by certain KPIs that we can define. So it can all kinds of KPIs, can be TVL, can be volume, can be user adoption, can be profitability of the Web3 business, whatever. In this example, I used simply the price of the token. So here, this is an example from a real token, how the price just goes down because of the vesting, because in the beginning, in the first years, there is a lot of vesting, a lot of supply hitting the market, but there is no demand for it because the product is maybe not mature enough, there is not enough demand, not enough adoption. And this is essentially what I also modeled here with the QTM, where you see exactly the same behavior. There's like this dumping, the price goes down in the beginning because, just the supply hits the market. And then after a certain amount of time, when the adoption comes, when the users are coming, the revenue is coming, buybacks can be done, then price will eventually recover. So, but this is like the state of how it is at the moment. And with adoption adjusted vesting, I think I have 5 more minutes, right? Oh, well, someone else. So here I just modeled like 3 different demand scenarios. So like with logistic function, linear function, exponential growth. And then the controller essentially managed like the different emissions to all the different points of time. And you see like for each of these different growth or demand scenarios, the controller will manage the emissions of tokens. That is what you see on the right side, the emission rate for the vesting participants. And on the bottom right side, you see essentially like how the price of the token would look like, that it will be essentially stabilized. So when the price goes up, more supply will be released to the ecosystem, which means obviously the early investors, they will sell, which means the price will then go down. And when when the price is below the implied price that I defined here, then the emissions will be cut down, but they will never be zero because we need to make sure that all the initial investors will get their allocation eventually. And and then this will essentially drive the price up again. And you can see through this controller approach, we can in the end reduce the volatility and we can stabilize the ecosystem. And I think, in my opinion, price is a very, very important metric for an ecosystem. We already heard it this morning. Then if the price just dumps down minus 90% in the beginning of the first year, it is very, very bad outlook for an ecosystem. And if we don't consider this, even if we know we are not able to forecast anything accurately, but at least we think about this demand side and we try to model it and to forecast it. And it's never like about one specific outcome, one specific value. That is why we are doing Monte Carlo simulations and parameter sweeps, where we can essentially sweep the whole space of solutions that are available. So this is just a few more graphics about what happens to the individual stakeholders or the individual receivers of these vested tokens, because we can also apply different weightings to these vestings, so that, for example, in the beginning, the ecosystem incentivization will get more allocations of the vested tokens, and the team will get less, and maybe vice versa in the end, because in the end, we don't want to incentivize the ecosystem just through vesting of tokens. We want to incentivize it through a sustainable flywheel. And just coming to an end. We are an accelerator for Web3 businesses. We are number one in terms of numbers, how many Web3 startups we are helping. We have a portfolio of 250 plus companies and 500 plus investors in our network. And feel free, if you are considering to become a founder, to reach out to get also access to all this knowledge and all these experts in our network. Okay, that's it from my side. Yeah.
We have one question. Can we have a mic here?
Just in your quantitative models, how exactly are you calculating the probability of someone dumping the token?
Yeah. In the model, this is essentially an input where we define essentially what is the demand for the token. And clearly, you can't define it, but we can give it a range and we can play around with values, and then we can essentially simulate different scenarios. So what happens if there is essentially no demand? We put in 0. Or there is huge demand and we put in a high number, and then we can see like what will happen to our ecosystem, to all the other metrics when we change it.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Just have you guys tried to classify based on how often people dump after their vesting period? If there's some sort of clusters that are being created based on that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's something we are working on, so analyzing like what is going on in the overall market, what is like VCs are doing in general. And like I said, or I showed you before, we are also looking in specific sectors and see like what is the percentage when they receive the token, what is the percentage essentially of these receivers allocating it to utilities or reinvesting it or using it for staking or whatever, or selling it. So that is essentially what I showed you before, like the distribution of behavior in the ecosystem. Yeah.
Hi, great presentation. Thank you so much for covering a wide array of topics. My question is more around, is this model also applicable for digital assets where you're looking at forward-facing contracts where the number of tokens are limited? And can a similar model be used for simulating some of those factors that you spoke about?
So we can simulate like fixed supply or also inflationary supply. It doesn't matter, both is possible, yeah.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, Achim from Outlier Ventures. And we keep on going with more token verification. We'll